Foreign ministers from the countries of India, Australia, Japan and United States are currently in Tokyo attending a meeting for Quad. Ahead of this dialogue, Indian External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar held a bilateral with US counterpart Antony Blinken, where both leaders spoke extensively on bolstering coordination and collectively committed to promote a free, open and prosperous Indo-Pacific. Jaishankar also met with Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong, where they are said to have spoken extensively on security, trade and education. In his opening statement at the Quad meet, Dr. S. Jaishankar cautioned that these are not easy times, terming this new era as one of re-globalization.
These are not easy times. A major challenge is to ensure global economic growth while also de-risking it. In a sense, we are in the midst of a re-globalization. At the same time, it is only our collective endeavors that can proof the international system against disruptions, man-made or natural. It is only our collaboration that can ensure that the Indo-Pacific remains free, remains open, stable, secure and prosperous. Our meeting should send a clear message that the Quad is here to stay, here to do and here to grow.
A press release from the US State Department affirmed the key agenda, underlining the bilateral between Blinken and Jaishankar prior to the Quad meet. Blinken was also accompanied by the Assistant Secretary of State for South and Central Asian Affairs, Donald Lu, and State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller. The Secretary of State underscored the importance of realizing a just and enduring peace for Ukraine in accordance to the UN Charter. This ahead of a planned visit by Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi next month to Ukraine. According to reports, the key topics discussed in the bilateral between India and US also included the deteriorating situation in West Asia, along with the conflict in Ukraine. Prime Minister Modi's visit to Russia, which coincided with the NATO summit in Washington earlier this month, left the US and its allies a bit wary of India's foreign policy outreach. Just last week at a congressional hearing, Donald Lu expressed disappointment over the symbolism and timing of the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Russia. And New Delhi, however, rejected Lu's comments and asserted that all countries have the freedom of choice in a multipolar world. It remains to be seen how both sides respond to Prime Minister Modi's upcoming visit to Ukraine next month. This will be the Indian Prime Minister's first visit to Ukraine since the beginning of the war in 2022. All right, for more on this, we're now being joined by our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal. He's joining us over the phone. Siddhant, now, we've heard what the State Department press release states, and there was this one line which, of course, stood out. We've covered that in the report. Secretary Blinken underscored the importance of realizing a just and enduring peace for Ukraine, consistent with the UN Charter. Now, if we were to just take this statement in the backdrop of what Donald Lu mentioned just last week in the congressional meeting, does this indicate that India's ties with Russia would have been brought up strongly in the meeting between Blinken and Jaishankar?
Well, that the American side will be having such conversations, because remember, this is the first meeting between the Indian External Affairs Minister and the American counterpart since, of course, the visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Russia. And, of course, this is also the first meeting between the two ministers since Dr. S. Jaishankar was reappointed as India's External Affairs Minister in the month of June. But all in all, when it comes to Russia, that remains the elephant in the room for India-US relationship, given that how Washington has been publicly making comments on the Indian Prime Minister's visit. India, of course, has made it clear that Russia is a close partner of India. It's a time-tested relationship, and that's not going to change. India, of course, has been significantly having the support of the Russians when it comes to the defense partnership, Make India initiative as well. And now with the upcoming visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine, there hasn't been no reaction by the American side publicly, but I do expect later this week there could be some reaction from the American side. It's still a month away, but essentially this will be a very, very big development for the West, which has been quoting New Delhi to give its support to the Ukrainian cause.
Siddhant, if I were to just take that from the other side, it's not just the US which is going to be responding to or reacting to Indian Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine. How do you feel Russia will view Prime Minister Modi's upcoming visit to Ukraine?
Well, essentially, there hasn't been any reaction by the Russian side, but it is quite given that this could have come up during Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Moscow when he met the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, essentially, if we recall, the Indian Prime Minister and the Russian President, when they met in the Dacha and the Kremlin, a statement was made which said that they're looking at some other initiatives to resolve the ongoing war in Ukraine. Nobody back then had any idea about what could these initiatives be. Right now also nobody knows anything, but the Indian Prime Minister's upcoming visit to Ukraine might have some kind of out-of-the-box solution. And of course, India's role, given a neutral country, in terms of resolving this ongoing war in Ukraine, which has continued for almost 3 years. In fact, last week, the Ukrainian minister spoke exclusively to WION and said she's very optimistic that the Indian Prime Minister will be traveling to Ukraine, and the presence of the leader of the world's largest democracy in Kiev will be a message not only to Moscow but also to the West.
Some very interesting points you made there, Siddhant. Thank you so much for joining in. That was Siddhant Sibal, our principal diplomatic correspondent, tracking all the diplomatic developments, joining us over the phone line.